Welcome into my studio. I'm working on this snow leopard. Here's a photo of the reference photo, snow leopard, and you can get hold of that from wildlifereferencephotos.com at a very good price. Supplies super simple. I've got a Caran d'Ache Luminance 6901 pencil, so that's that light brownish colour, and the darker reddy brown colour, that's Derwent Drawing Chinese white. Just goes a little bit whiter. The paper, Strathmore artagain black paper. Now I spent a bit of time drawing this one myself on some scrap paper, then I've transferred it over with some white transfer paper because I don't want any eraser marks or anything, if I can help it, on this black paper. So you can see I've got my reference right by the side on the left. It's quite a large drawing. I think it's about 15.5 inches wide. Wanted to make it quite large and dramatic. And I'm using the Caran d'Ache Luminance. I've checked out lots and lots of white pencils over the years, which are the whitest, and this Caran d'Ache performs probably the best of all of them and gives me pretty much as white as I can possibly get, which is what I need on this black paper. The artagain paper, once again, that's superb. It's very dark black. Lots of papers and lots of artists recommend different papers and say they're black, and they're not really black when you get them. To get something really punchy, which is the effect I'm after with this drawing, I wanted the darkest paper I could get. So far it's the artagain. Now, as per usual, I've got a video from the side, so my head and that is out of the way. So obviously perspective looks like it's off a bit, but I've double checked and I've measured as well against the reference, and it's pretty accurate. So don't be concerned about that. Just watch the technique, learn the technique, which is quite easy in this instance, and then you can apply it to your own reference photo and subject that you want to do yourself. Now, when you're doing a black and white drawing such as this, white on black paper, the limiting factor is always going to be how white you can get the white marks, the pencil marks. Now that's why I'm starting on the right hand side. The reference photo has got dramatic lighting. I've really enhanced that as well in Photoshop to give it a big punchy difference between the one side and the other. So I wanted to make sure to be able to judge how dark I could go, because obviously the darkest I can go is the black of the paper. As I mentioned, the most difficult part is getting the white enough, and I'm never going to get it as white as I can see on this reference photo. So by starting with the white side, I'm setting the boundary for the top part, the lightest part of my tonal range. That means I can then subdue all the rest of it to try and still keep that real dark side of the face or the head against the light side of the head. Keep that range going well, because if I started with the dark side and copied off the reference pretty accurately, what I would find is by the time I get to the light side, I won't be able to go light enough to get that dramatic difference between the two. So that's why I've started with the right hand side. Being right-handed, normally I would start with the left-hand side on a drawing or a painting, so that I'm not bringing my hand over it and potentially smudging it. Good thing with the artagain paper and the coloured pencil, doesn't really smudge anyway, so I haven't got to worry about that in this instance. So that's just a bit of an explanation of why I'm starting with the light side of the head. Now this drawing took me around about 2.5 hours to complete, so it's pretty fast. This light on dark is quite a fast technique. Now, because I'm using coloured pencils and not pastels for this, I can obviously sharpen them really well. The Derwent pencil, so I'll be the one with that reddy brownish shaft on it, that's a really soft coloured pencil in terms of coloured pencils, so that one can be prone to breaking if you sharpen it really sharp, and I'll only use that very infrequently in the drawing anyway. 90%, 99% of the drawing is going to be done with this Luminance pencil. I've got two of those on the go, so one is fairly blunt and I'm using that for thicker marks, and then I've got one that's really sharpened a lot, and that I'll use to put the fine detail in. And with these Caran d'Ache luminants, I can push quite hard on the paper without them breaking at all. Now there's going to obviously be quite a lot of repetitive type of marks due to the nature of this drawing, so I will be speeding up sections obviously, so you're not sitting through 2.5 hours of it. And there'll also be instances where there's not a lot of point me doing much voiceover either, because it's basically just watching how I do the technique and building up the layers on top. So the secret is, I don't want to create as many hair marks as we can see on the reference, because what can happen with these white on black drawings is that you've got white, you could be putting white down on the whole of the surface, and before you know it, you've colored it all in white. And I need to have bits of the dark paper showing through so that I can create that fur texture. So you can see I'm not covering all of the paper. Got to leave little parts to show through for the shadow areas of the fur and the hairs, the finer hairs. And another tip is not to go too light too soon. Gradually build it up. I know I've got to go lighter on this section, and when I push harder as I am now, I can layer those lighter marks on top. Now what you want to do is get a scrap piece of this paper. It's pointless using a different paper, actually this paper, and try out the pencil on it for yourself, for your own learning, to see how white a mark you can make and how hard you've got to press. Don't pick it up for the first time and start doing a drawing such as this. Get yourself a bit of practice going, a bit of experience with the pencils and the paper. Now this area needs to be very bright, very white, so I've just lightly put in an underlayer because I don't want much of the dark paper showing in this particular section. Then I'm going over the top. You can see I've got my sharper pencil. I'm pushing quite hard, making the white marks, the upper hairs, the top hairs that's going over the top of that underlayer. And you can see I can't never get it as white as we're seeing in the reference photo. Now I could get this whiter if I use another technique you may have seen on my videos where I paint pastel matte paper black. Now that works for some subjects. It would have been okay with this. You can see I'm going in with that Derwent now to try and get a whiter white on top. It doesn't go much whiter, but it is a little bit whiter. So I could have painted that pastel matte as I've shown on other videos, and that would have, because of the texture then on the surface, I could have made these white coloured pencils go even whiter. The problem is you've got a lot of grain then on that paper, and I didn't particularly like it. I've tried it out. I tried drawing the eye on that, and then I drew it on some artagain paper, and I compared the two, and I much preferred the appearance I was getting on the artagain paper. Even though the whites were not quite as white, I liked the fact that it wasn't showing so much grain on it. Now another tip, the artagain paper has kind of got two sides to it. So if you put it on a surface, I was using a drawing board, so a very flat surface, and push hard with your finger to feel the texture. If you push hard up and down on the paper, flip it over and push hard again and check it. If your fingers are quite sensitive, you'll notice that one side is rougher than the other. And to do this drawing, I've used the side that's slightly smoother, so it gives me even less texture again on there. Okay, so back down into normal speed, and I'm going to work on the eye I don't need to get it exactly the same as the reference. We can see that the light is really bright on the bottom section of the eye, and we can also see in the shadows the haze coming down where we've got a lot of that strong light coming down. We can see the shadow of the haze in the upper part of the eye, and we really can't see much of the pupil at all. Now I don't want to go too light in the dark areas. That's what's going to make this drawing look more realistic, more dramatic, those shadows. So I want to preserve those shadows, and I'm just giving little hints here and there of light that's bouncing around in the eye, and I'll gradually go brighter and brighter on that bottom section. Using an extremely light touch in places, barely putting anything more than the weight of the pencil on the surface. Where I wanted to go lighter down in this bottom section and push in obviously a lot harder. Because I want quite an even mark here, I'm using little small circular strokes rather than lines that I'm using obviously to create the fur texture. So you can see I'm pushing hard there. Much lighter down here. And I really don't need to follow exactly all these marks in the same places. It's okay, I'm always after the impression of the subject, the general overview of it, rather than trying to duplicate each little speck and create something photorealistic. So that's that small eye pretty much done. I'm now going to just using that Derwent, just put a couple of those little highlights here and there. As I said, it's just slightly whiter, brighter, a bit more opaque. Those little touches can sometimes make quite a big difference. And I'm just going to start now working out from this eye. So I've set myself the appearance of how light I can go. Obviously the paper, as I said, is my dark elements. I'm not going to be using any black pencils, any black charcoals or anything other than these white pencils. So supplies really are super cheap and simple in this particular demonstration. So another white bright area is this section next over from the eye, so I'm going to be pushing quite hard again there, building it up. Then as mentioned, I'll start working outwards from the eye, getting a bit more into the actual texture of the animal. So as you can see with this technique, areas do grow quite fast, even when I'm not doing a sped up version, show me kind of like 6 times normal speed. It is quite fast to do something this large in coloured pencil. It could have been even faster if it was pastel, because they are a lot more opaque, but it's still quite fast, the technique, for something this size. As I mentioned, the secret is not to cover all of the black of the paper. Now I'm just using my pencil on his side here just to put a thin layer of pencil down, and then I'm coming back over, pushing hard to put some of the detail on top. What I don't want is to create a flat white area. There I am with that Derwent again. I won't be using that much more. Just giving a small amount of punch here. But yeah, as I was saying, I don't want to create flat areas. For instance, you can see on the reference bottom right we got that cheek area that's quite bright, and there's not a lot of texture in there at all. I think I was just blowing the paper a bit there. I see that moving. But because I can't create that whiteness on here, I'm going to put a bit more texture on there, so it's more interesting to look at rather than a mass of white. Now, as you can clearly see, I can't match the exact appearance of the reference photo. And I mentioned that at the beginning of the video. I've got to adjust it for the paper. But what you've got to remember, people are not going to be seeing the reference right next to the drawing. People that are not learning from my tutorials anyway. If you saw my finished work in the gallery, people are just going to take it as that. They're not going to then look at the reference and say, oh, he didn't go quite as white there. So that's not going to be the purpose of this drawing. We're not after a photo duplicate of it in any way. I want that impression of a light side against a dark side, and when I go on to that dark side, you'll see over to the dark side. Even when I go over to the dark side, you're going to see how I really subdue that area, which when you look at the final drawing as a whole will make the light side a lot more punchy looking. Now you could see there I just went around the area that's going to be those dark markings. Obviously I'm not going to fill those in, and if I do, I'll use a very, very light touch and barely put any haze in there at all. Okay, so back down to regular speed. I've chopped my pencil up just a little bit. I haven't gone and turned it into a needle point. Don't want the markings to be too fine, but I need to be aware on this section of the direction of the hair and fur, the way it's lying. There's lots of little twists and turns, especially on the section I'm working on now, so I want to get that as accurate as I can. And once again, I'm going to be leaving quite a bit of the paper showing through. So the first layer that I'll do won't be too bright, and then I can start to put more individual highlights on top. So slowly but surely is the way to tackle the bridge of the nose and coming across. You don't want to go just rushing ahead and putting marks any way or any which way, because what you can find then is they'll all of a sudden you've got them all parallel lines coming perhaps straight down the face, whereas there are, as I mentioned, lots of those little twists and turns. And as the hairs and fur is coming down towards the nose, so the actual nose itself, they're pointing downwards. The hairs will be pointing downwards. On this section you've got lots of small swirls happening, and then as we come to the central area, you can see I'm just putting in a few lines now. They come sideways where they meet together from both sides of the eyes, come and meet together in that central part in between the eyes. So as I said, really study the growth and the way that hair is lying, the individual hairs is lying on the surface, and try to match that as best you can. It'll really aid the realism in your work, especially on these big cats. So in this section I've done my first layer, and now you can see how I'm pushing harder with the pencil, quite a sharp pencil, laying the brighter layers on top where that light is really catching the uppermost parts of the hair, the fur, but you can still see dark paper through it, and I want to keep that there. If I start putting more and more pencil on top, all of a sudden I'll end up with exactly what I said I didn't want, and that would be that mass of all the same color brightness white colored pencil, and that's not going to show any texture of the fur at all. So a bit of a tricky area down here, just because I want to try to retain as many of these black markings as possible. I've got to remember that I'm going around those. You can erase on this black paper. It's not particularly easy. I've got a black eraser that will work on there, but if possible I'll try not to be doing that. Sharper pencil now. I'm putting in some of these small dots on the nose and pushing a bit harder, so that's giving me a lighter appearance in general, because this nose is going to be quite an area of interest, so I want a good bit of detail in it. The black line that's separating the fleshy part of the nose from the fur, I can erase that back in, no problem at all. I'm going to make all of this area, especially this left hand side, much lighter. So I'm using a very tiny eraser, mono zero eraser. It's got quite a hard eraser rubber in it, but look how fine that tip is, and it's a really invaluable bit of kit. When it's coming off the screen, I'm just wiping the tip of it, clean it a bit, and you can see how I can retain and get that black area back. I can also put a couple of these dots in, although I'm not too bothered about those really at all. But really great eraser to get, and a couple of years ago it was extremely difficult to get hold of them. They seem to have gone off the market, but they're back again now, in the UK at least, and they're only cheap. They're only something like £3 or £4, and you can buy the refills for them as well. So if you're into pencil work in particular, like coloured pencil or graphite, I would buy a couple of them and stock up on some of the refills as well. They're cheap too, just in case they start going out of stock again. So once again, that eraser is called a Mono Zero, and it's by Tombow. Okay, just going to carry on now, building up some more texture. Not a lot more to do on this side before I start to work on that darker side of the head. And now I've got my reference photo folded in a different way so I can work on the chin. So you can see I'm really using that reference photo. And make sure you've got a good printout. If you haven't got a good printout, or you're not working from a screen with a good image, you're really setting yourself up to struggle. I always spend time, and I may do 4 or 5 printouts to get it exactly how I want it. It's not always a case of just push print and it comes out perfect. And make sure you're using decent paper. If you're not using decent paper, you will never ever get a good printout that you can work from. So don't go cutting costs too much on printer paper. So starting off fairly light, definitely got to make sure that I don't go covering up all the black of the paper here. I want to create a nice textured chin. So once again, making sure I'm going in all the right directions and leaving areas for the dark markings. And just working my way around, changing angles, changing positions as required. Then I come on top of this with that lighter, sharper pencil. So now I'm pushing much harder, and the harder that I'm pushing, obviously the whiter it's getting, but I'll never ever get it as white as I mentioned before as in the reference photo. But as long as it's all relative on my drawing, you'll see at the end when I take a photo of the finished product under good studio lighting and with the image made to look more like the true thing in Photoshop, because obviously a lot of these cameras, video cameras, they can subdue things a bit and the lighting works differently. You'll see at the end then that when you're not comparing it against a reference photo, it'll look quite good, quite punchy, because it's all relative. So I'm just going to carry on with this layering of the chin. So starting with the whiskers now, sharp pencil, I can finish the little tips off later on. You see it starts to help to push the underlayers back in the drawing. So I'm not going overly crazy with these, just here and there. There are some dark black ones, just one or two on the reference photo, and I'm not going to use a black pencil just to do those. So swap in position, I'll now come and do this side as well. And these whiskers, some areas are in shadow, some areas are just catching a little bit of light on them. I'm just going to pop my reference quite close by because I want to see where the light is catching the edges of some of the whiskers. Oh, I just reattach it there, a bit of masking tape. And once I've got this light on there, it's only in a few places, and thickening a couple up, and that's just about done. Wanted to subdue that a little bit. It was standing out a bit too much, so once again that's where that black eraser came in really good. Could have used that mono 0, but it does leave the faintest, very faintest mark on the black paper, so the black erasers is that bit better. So you can see I'm just adding where that light is catching on a couple of these whiskers. So hope you've enjoyed this drawing. Very limited supplies as mentioned, and I'll finish off with a photograph of the finished drawing under studio lighting. And I'll see you all again real soon on the next video. Just wanted to quickly mention my Patreon channel for those looking for even more in-depth art instruction. It's packed full of pastel videos, oil videos as well, and those videos are being added to new ones every single month. I have videos for the complete beginner that have never done pastels or oils before with just limited supplies, and I take you from the very first blocking in all the way through to the final detailed drawings and paintings. I've also got some really unusual subjects as well, and in all of my videos I always take you through all the details. You see everything I do, how I create my work. But it's not just for beginners, it's also for novices, and I also show the best artwork that I've ever done as well. And this particular elephant video spans 6 hours, so you know you're going to see tons and tons of details, tips and techniques. And as mentioned, I've got lots of oil videos on there too, so there really is something for everybody, and you get access to hundreds of hours worth of videos for just $4. Now over 1,000 members strong. Hope to see you there soon.